They say they're fine, but you can feel the heaviness behind that one small word. Fine has become the safest mask in the world, the word people use when they've run out of ways to explain their pain. Carl Jung would call it the persona, the image you build to survive among others. It protects you. It earns you acceptance. But the more you rely on it, the more you lose the quiet, unfiltered self hiding behind your smile. Jung said that every mask begins as protection and ends as a prison. People who pretend they're fine aren't liars. They're survivors. They learned early that emotions make others uncomfortable, that being honest about sadness pushes people away. So they became pleasant, controlled, endlessly okay. It's easier to appear strong than to risk being misunderstood. But pretending has a cost. Each time you say, "I'm fine," when you're breaking, the psyche stores that truth somewhere deeper. It doesn't disappear. It waits. And one day, when silence feels unbearable, the stored emotions return as exhaustion, irritability, or sudden emptiness. Jung believed that unexpressed emotion never dies. It only goes underground and begins to direct your life from the shadows. Look closely at the people who always say they're fine. They laugh easily. They listen well. They never cause trouble. Yet they carry the kind of fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. They are the ones who overthink every word they say, who help everyone else heal, but never ask for help themselves. Their strength looks admirable, but it's really endurance in disguise. In Jungian psychology, this behavior is the conflict between the persona and the shadow. The persona says, "I'm strong." The shadow whispers, "I'm tired." The persona says, "I don't need anyone." The shadow cries, "Please notice me." The greater the distance between those two voices, the deeper the loneliness becomes. People who pretend they're fine often come from environments where emotions were labeled as weakness. They grew up faster than they should have. They became caretakers, mediators, the stable ones. So they learned to manage their pain by minimizing it. They confuse emotional suppression with maturity. In reality, what they call control is often disconnection, a numbness mistaken for peace. That's why, even in happy moments, something feels missing. They smile, but it doesn't reach their eyes. They talk, but never reveal. They keep people close, but never close enough to see the cracks. Jung taught that what you hide owns you. When you deny your sadness, it doesn't vanish. It slips into the unconscious and shapes your choices. You begin to pick relationships where you don't have to be fully seen. You stay busy, so you never have to sit with your feelings. You become addicted to appearing fine because your identity depends on it. But underneath the performance, a quiet truth remains. They don't want to be rescued. They just want to be understood without having to explain everything. They don't want pity. They want permission to stop pretending. Every "I'm fine" is a silent plea for safety. Safety to express without judgment. Safety to be human without losing love. That's why Jung believed healing begins not with change, but with acknowledgement. The moment you say, "I'm not fine," your shadow exhales. You stop resisting what's real. You stop splitting yourself into the acceptable and the hidden. That's the first step toward wholeness, because pretending might protect you from rejection, but it also protects you from connection. And connection is what the soul needs most. When you finally allow someone to see the chaos beneath your calm, something sacred happens. The walls soften, the body relaxes. You realize that vulnerability doesn't make you weaker. It makes you real. And realness is the only thing that heals. There's a strange peace in pretending. It lets you move through life without explaining yourself, without being pitied, without opening old wounds. But that peace is borrowed. It always has to be paid back. Carl Jung wrote that anything you repress becomes part of your shadow, the unseen half of the psyche that carries what consciousness refuses. People who pretend they're fine keep building this shadow. Every time they smile through pain, every time they say, "It's nothing," while something inside them screams, they deposit another piece of truth into that dark storage. At first, it seems harmless. You go to work, meet friends, make jokes. You're functioning, and people praise you for being strong. But strength built on suppression begins to crack in quiet places. When you're brushing your teeth, lying awake at 2 a.m., scrolling without purpose. That's when the mask slips. You feel the ache, but you can't explain it. It's not depression, not exactly. It's like standing behind glass, watching your own life. Jung would say the glass is your persona, the identity you created to be accepted. The more convincing it becomes, the less air reaches the real you. That's why people who pretend they're fine often feel emotionally suffocated. They live in performance mode, terrified that honesty will cost them love or respect. And yet, in relationships, that pretense slowly poisons connection. When you keep saying, "I'm fine," you teach others to stop asking. When you hide pain, people mirror your surface. Soon, every conversation becomes polite and hollow, a loop of two masks talking. Jung believed the soul craves authenticity the way the body craves oxygen. Without it, everything alive begins to dull. Behind every fine person, there's usually a story of responsibility. Maybe they grew up in chaos and learned to be the calm one. Maybe they were told not to cry, to be grateful, to stay positive. So now they carry storms quietly because they think that's what maturity means. They're not emotionless. They're over-controlled. And that control turns into isolation. You can see it in subtle ways. They apologize for expressing sadness. They change the topic when someone asks how they're doing. They downplay every victory with, "It's nothing." They exist in a constant negotiation between honesty and harmony. But the psyche can't live like that forever. Jung said the unlived parts of the self don't vanish. They appear through symptoms. So, I'm fine people develop tension in the chest, chronic fatigue, sudden irritation, creative block. The body starts saying what the mouth refuses. It's not weakness, it's communication. One woman once told Jung she felt empty despite having everything. He replied, "You don't possess your feelings possess you." She had built a perfect life, but ignored her emotional world until it rebelled. That rebellion is what we call breakdowns or midlife crises, moments when the mask collapses under its own weight. In those moments, pretending ends. Not because we choose truth, but because truth refuses to stay buried. And here's the paradox. That collapse is the beginning of healing. When the strong one finally admits they're not okay, something sacred happens. The soul, long ignored, finally breathes. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, the moment you stop dividing yourself into good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable. You realize that vulnerability doesn't make you less strong. It makes your strength honest. You understand that emotional truth doesn't push real people away. It filters out the ones who only loved your mask. People who pretend they're fine often fear that showing pain will make them a burden. But in reality, hiding pain makes you unreachable. You can't be loved for who you are if no one ever meets who you are. Pretending creates safety, yes, but it also creates loneliness. The path back starts small. One honest answer to, "How are you?" One pause before saying, "I'm fine." It's choosing discomfort over distance. It's learning that being seen, even in pain, is lighter than carrying perfection alone. Jung believed the goal of life wasn't happiness, but wholeness. To live with every truth you contain. Wholeness includes grief, anger, fear, joy. When you allow all of them, you stop pretending because you no longer need to. You're no longer acting out a role. You're finally existing as yourself. At some point, pretending becomes too heavy to carry. You wake up one day, and the word "fine" feels like a lie stuck in your throat. The mask that once kept you safe now keeps you small. Carl Jung called this moment the confrontation with the self. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. You're sitting alone, maybe in the middle of an ordinary day, and a question rises from nowhere. Who am I when I'm not pretending? At first, it feels terrifying, because when you've built your life around appearing strong, being honest feels like breaking something sacred. But that's exactly what Jung meant, that the path to wholeness always begins with disobedience, not against the world, but against the false version of yourself you've been protecting. People who pretend they're fine aren't avoiding truth because they hate it. They're avoiding it because they fear what it might change. They've convinced themselves that being honest will push people away. But Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The more you hide, the more your shadow controls you. The only way back is through awareness. That's where the transformation begins. When you finally stop saying, "I'm fine," you don't fall apart. You unfold. All the feelings you buried begin to breathe again. The grief, the anger, the tenderness, the hope, they were never gone. They were waiting for you to stop performing strength long enough to feel them. You start to notice what real peace feels like. Not the polished calm of pretending, but the raw stillness of honesty. You begin to tell the truth in small ways. I'm tired. I miss them. I don't know what's next. Those small truths begin to rebuild your connection to life. And slowly, you begin to attract people who don't need you to be perfect. People who listen without fixing, who stay when you're messy, who remind you that real love isn't earned through endurance. It's received through presence. Jung believed that the soul doesn't want perfection. It wants authenticity. The moment you choose authenticity over appearance, your life stops feeling like a performance. The strong ones always think honesty will make them fall apart. But when they finally break, they realize something incredible. The pieces don't scatter. They fit. The self they've been suppressing merges with the self they've been showing. That union is what Jung called individuation, becoming whole again. It's not about being happy all the time. It's about becoming real enough to handle both joy and pain without needing to hide. From that point, even pain changes texture. It's no longer a threat. It's information. You start understanding your emotions as messages, not enemies. Sadness means something's missing. Anger means something's crossed a line. Loneliness means something within you needs attention. When you listen, you no longer drown in feelings. You learn from them. And here's the quiet truth Jung understood so well. When you stop pretending you're fine, you don't become weak. You become trustworthy to yourself and to others. Because nothing is more magnetic than someone who's real. The people who used to say, "I'm fine," eventually become the ones who listen differently, love differently, live differently. They're not afraid of other people's emotions anymore because they've met their own. They speak softly, but truthfully. They give permission for others to drop their masks too. That's how healing spreads, through honesty, not advice. You stop trying to be the person everyone depends on and start being someone you can depend on. That shift changes everything. The world around you doesn't necessarily get easier, but you do. You stop breaking under pressure because you no longer divide yourself to survive it. Pretending was survival, but truth is rebirth. And when you finally choose truth, you realize the people who were meant for you never needed the mask anyway. So if you're tired of saying, "I'm fine," it's because you're ready for something deeper. You're ready to meet the part of you that's been silently waiting for permission to exist. That's not weakness. That's awakening. And Jung would say that's where real life finally begins. So if you've been saying, "I'm fine," more often than you should, maybe it's time to stop convincing the world you're okay and start being honest with yourself about what hurts. You don't have to carry peace on your face while your heart trembles underneath. You don't have to be the strong one just because you always were. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is, "I'm not fine right now," because that's where healing begins. In truth, not performance. If this spoke to you, pause for a second. Because you're not alone. You never were. Like, comment, and subscribe, not for the algorithm, but to remind yourself that somewhere out there, someone else is learning to take their mask off too.